Well, hey, good evening, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And tonight we have Marty Wingate. She's going to be talking about the third in her first edition library series. The Librarian Always Rings Twice. And Marty has very kindly signed a batch of books for us. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll go ahead and put a link to our web store in the comments field on YouTube and Facebook, should you wish to purchase an autographed copy. So, and then our good friend, Lesa Holstine is joining us as a guest host this evening. And Lesa is the 2022 Raven Award winner from the Mystery Writers of America. We can say we knew her when. She was a librarian out here in Glendale, long time friend of the Poison Pen, blogger for us, and blogger on Lesa's book critiques. So Lesa, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Patrick. I just love the Poison Pen, and you know, when you said longtime friend, oh yes. Absolutely,
and we have a long view design on kind of luring Lesa back out here into the desert. So hopefully that will happen at some point. And you won't be stuck at home for a snow day. I understand the library is closed for a couple days due to the weather.
Yes, yeah, snow, sleet. We have it all today and tomorrow.
Nice. Well, nice to kick back with a cup of tea and have the cats kind of circling and yeah. Well, everybody watching, you'll be pleased to hear that I'm going to disappear from view in just a second, but I will be monitoring the comments field. So if you have questions for Marty or Lesa, go ahead and put them in. And usually how it works is Lesa will summon me back on screen towards the end of the hour, and I'll be happy to ask any of your questions. So without further ado, you guys have fun.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick. Marty, I love John Charles' usual comment when he introduces people. And you've probably had it before from him, but would you tell us who you were before you became a writer?
Oh, that's a long and winding road, Lesa. Well, as many writers will tell you who eventually get published one way or another, I've always written, but just, you know, stories for fun. I can remember writing when I was a girl, but I'll try to make this as brief as possible. My first college degree was in drama. And then I thought, well, I'm going to need to get a job. So I got a master's degree in speech pathology. And I was a speech pathologist for many years. In fact, my first job was in Tucson with the Tucson School District. And after that, I moved to Ireland for 2 years and then came back and moved to Seattle and worked as a speech pathologist all along, got married, eventually became a master gardener, a volunteer master gardener. And that led me back into writing kind of through the back door. And I wrote garden articles and garden how-to books. And then I had a friend who kept saying, you know, you should write a garden mystery. You should write a garden mystery. And I kept saying, oh, I don't write fiction. Well, what would I be doing with that? Eventually, she talked me into it. And so my first series was a garden mystery series. And now I'm writing about libraries.
I was going to ask you about the garden mystery series.
Yes.
But I'm actually going to ask you a little bit later on about your historical fiction too.
Yes.
So yes, and I really want to hear about both books. But your mystery series and your historical fiction all takes place in England.
Yes, everything I read.
So why England?
Why England? We love going over there. In normal times, my husband and I go over once a year, sometimes twice a year. I have for the last 2022 now, 20 years led garden tours of England and Scotland and Ireland, and small groups, and we work with a local travel agent, and so he does this is just perfect. This is ideal for me. We go on a tour, I have absolutely no responsibilities except to know about gardens and plants. And so when someone comes to me and says, there's a leak in my hotel room, I say, Brad, ask me what tree that is and I'll tell you. And so we love it over there. We feel at home. We have friends there now. We go back to the same places often and rent an apartment and stay for a while. We don't, we go for maybe at the most 6 weeks, or otherwise our cats wouldn't talk to us when we got home.
So you spent 2 years in Ireland, which is my love.
Oh.
But I want to ask you, where did the love of England, Great Britain come from in your past?
Well, it started with Ireland, and I can remember one summer in high school when my girlfriend who lived across the street and I spent the entire summer, our parents probably thought, oh good, they're quiet, they're doing something, planning our trip to Ireland that we were going to take right after we graduated from high school. And those were the days of the books of whatever country, Ireland on $5 and $10 a day. You remember those? Those were great. I should have kept that book. It's a collector's item now. We planned where we were going to go, what train we were going to take where. I mean, everything. We didn't go, of course, after we graduated. And I went about 6 years later on my own to Ireland. And then I was single at the time, and I went 2 summers in a row, and friends kept saying, oh, we know you're going to move there. And I thought, well, okay. And I worked as a speech therapist. Strangely enough, I got a job in my field there. And that just started it, because then I went to England too. We had family friends who were English, and I visited their family. And I don't know, I just got hooked.
Oh, okay. I just wondered, I know Cara Black's love of France came from her family. Her father was a Francophile, so I just wondered if there was something in your background that
well, as far as Ireland is concerned, I probably have Irish ancestors, but I figure everybody in the world has Irish ancestors. I don't know. It just I wish I had an actual reason, but I can't base it in an actual reason.
Okay, I just wondered. As I said, I'm going to ask a little bit later on, but your first edition's library mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come up with that idea?
It was at a time, this is in sort of the business of publishing, it was at a time when my first publisher was not accepting manuscripts any longer. So my first 2 series are ebook only, ebook and audio. And they are from an imprint called Alibi, which is a Penguin Random House imprint. It was the time when publishers were saying, well, we better get into this ebook business. And they launched all these imprints that were ebook only. And so that and the Potting Shed Mysteries and the Birds of a Feather Mysteries are with Alibi. They stopped taking manuscripts just at the time as I was changing agents, because my former agent retired. And so I got hooked up with a fabulous agent. I love my agent. And she said, have you ever thought about writing a 3rd series? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm so suggestible. So we chatted about it. And it was sort of it was my second idea, actually. Golden Age of Mystery. What about set in present day, something about the Golden Age of Mystery? And we chatted about it from there. And I had to think of a protagonist, and it sounds sort of mechanical, but the first thing this is a 3rd series I've written, so I had to think of how this would be different from my other 2 series, how my protagonist would be different from my other 2 protagonists. And so at first it's very, well, she's this age and, she's divorced and she has a daughter in her early 20s, but it doesn't take long before the mechanics of it get out of my hands and this whole world is populated in my head. So I on purpose set Haley up as not knowing anything about the golden age of mystery because she read 19th century literature at university, because I know what I like in the golden age of mystery, but I don't know I don't know everyone. And so I was able to learn along with Haley.
Okay, that was one of my questions for later, but I'm going to ask you right now because I know there may be people watching who aren't familiar with the golden age of mystery. Um, and even if you don't know everybody, you
Yeah.
have much more knowledge than a lot of people do. So, talk to us a little bit about the golden age of mystery and maybe some of the authors from that period.
The golden age of mystery started in the 20s and lasted into the 50s, although obviously many of the most famous authors wrote outside. Agatha Christie was still writing up until her death. And there were both men and women, although the first edition library has mostly women authors because that's who Lady Fowling liked to collect. And they were a real mix. I mean, you had people like Dorothy L. Sayers, one of the most famous authors, and her amateur sleuth, Lord Peter. She actually didn't write that many books about Lord Peter and then Harriet Vane. I love it when Harriet Vane comes in. And then she started writing Christian literature and critique and plays and stuff. So it's kind of funny how these people kind of came and went. Another of the names that is at the top of most people's list, and well should be, is Josephine Tay. I can't remember her real name. She wrote plays. She wrote books with Inspector Grant. That's her policeman. But she was a very private person, and no one really knew a lot about her. And she didn't write all that many books, and she didn't want to be called a mystery writer, So it's a really mixed group. I love her books. I think it's very interesting that she has The Singing Sands, one of her Inspector Grant books. He's recovering from a nervous breakdown. And you don't see that very often, usually have these iron guy things. And so Agatha Christie, of course, is, fabulous. But I also love Ngaio Marsh. Ngaio Marsh was from New Zealand, but most of her books are set in England. And she had Inspector Allen, that was her detective. And she wrote a lot of books, and Marjorie Allingham, Campion, she wrote a lot of books. So the characters changed through the books, and I really like that. So for Ngaio Marsh, Inspector Allen, after, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 books, he meets Agatha Troy. She's called Troy in the books, and she's an artist, and they end up getting married. So this, launches this whole, they're a great couple. So not in any particular order, Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Ngaio Marsh, Josephine Tay, Marjorie Allingham. Some of these have great television adaptations, of course, and Patricia Wentworth, whom you may or may not find on a lot of lists for the Golden Age of Mystery. And I think she's been overlooked, and that's not fair because her Miss Silver series is fabulous.
Well, one advantage to having Patrick in the background is he said Josephine Tay was a pseudonym used by Elizabeth McIntosh, and she was from July 25th, 1896 to February 13th, 1952, and she was a Scottish author.
Yes, she lived in Scotland, and she was very involved with the theater. She became friends with John Gielgud and several, well-known actors. And I heard, this is a great story. I think it's true, but it's a great story anyway. Several years ago, Nicola Upson, the author Nicola Upson, wanted to write a biography of Josephine Tay. Now I think there is a biography coming out, but then she couldn't find any information. This is how private a woman Josephine Tay wanted to be. So instead of writing a biography, she wrote murder mysteries using Josephine Tay as the main character in the books, which I thought was fascinating.
Yes, yes. So we have the Golden Age of Mystery and the first edition library. So tell us a little bit about Lady Fowler.
And this is, I thought you were going to say, and why is this library in Bath?
Well, you can talk about that as well.
Well, it's a present day series, and it takes it's set in Bath, England, and it has to do with Lady Fowling. And this is what I love, because when people say, why is it set in Bath? I say, well, that's where Lady Fowling lived. So it's really nice when you can blame something on one of your characters, especially if the character isn't even alive anymore. So Lady Fowling is definitely a character in the book. She's not a ghost, or anything like that. I don't want people to think it's a ghost story, but she died 3 years before the first book in the series, The Bodies in the Library, came out. I mean, before that story was set. And she was 94. She had a long and very productive life. She married quite young. She married a man 50 years her senior, who was a baronet, and his family had made loads of money in tins. Now, not in the metal tin, but making tins for like tomato soup and stuff like that. Heinz beans. So Lady Fowling loved the Golden Age of Mystery, and she collected a lot of first editions and rare collectibles, different editions and different covers, and translated books from mostly the women. And she also really liked Daphne du Maurier, so she included her in the library, even though Daphne du Maurier is not necessarily on any list of Golden Age of Mystery authors. Romantic suspense, and she writes a lot of great stuff. So that Lady Fowling left her library. She started the first edition society and made sure that everything was set up, and the library itself and the society is based in her house, Middlebank House in Bath. I'm sure everyone's seen pictures of the Royal Crescent in Bath, those terraced houses. So she didn't live in the Royal Crescent, but it was a terrace house like that. Very nice, but very up and down. They didn't spread out a lot this way with houses in Georgian times. So that's where the society is based. That's where the library is. That's where Haley works, and that's where Haley lives, because when they sympathetically remodeled the house inside, it's listed, so they had to get permission for this. The top floor, so that would be 1, 2, 3. That would be our 4th floor, because in England, in the British Isles, the ground floor is the ground floor, and then the first floor is 1 floor up. Haley lives in the flat at the top. Mrs. Woolgar, the secretary for this society, lives downstairs in not the basement flat. We don't like to call it that. Mrs. Woolgar would never allow that. It's the lower ground floor, or the garden flat, because in the back, the land kind of falls away. So she's got windows and stuff to the outside. I've been there. I just feel like I've been there.
You know everything about what that house looks like.
Yeah, I do.
So Daphne du Maurier's Frenchmans Creek is the primary book in this one. Give us a little bit of background on Frenchmans Creek.
Well, I use in the first book, in The Bodies in the Library, obviously, as if you know any of the titles of Agatha Christie, that has an Agatha Christie thread running through it. I don't copy anyone's plot or anything, but in book 2, Murder is a Must, that had a lot to do with Murder Must Advertise, Dorothy L. Sayers. That's my favorite Dorothy L. Sayers book. And so now Frenchmans Creek, Daphne du Maurier. This is my favorite Daphne du Maurier book. And how nice, I get to use all my favorite books in here. I love Rebecca. I love My Cousin Rachel. I love some of her very odd short stories. But there's something about Frenchmans Creek that when I start, and it doesn't matter how many times I've read it, when I start reading that first chapter, I just feel myself being drawn into that story. For anyone who hasn't read it, or maybe it's been a long time since you've read it, the first chapter talks about what that place would look like today, or, Navron House, the creek. And it talks about how the house that's for the setting for this amazing story is now, they've got a tea room in the dining room, a tea shop, and this and that. And you see it through today's eyes, but then the narration starts to take you back to the 17th century. This tale of, and women with the big hair and all that stuff. And this story of a woman leaving London with her children and really running away from a life that she decided is her own life made her sick, and escaping to Cornwall and meeting a pirate. So that's the gist of the story.
So the librarian always rings twice. Now I get both the titles of your previous books, and I know that you don't always pick the title, that sometimes that's the publisher. When I picked up The Librarian Always Rings Twice, I went back to look at the summary of The Postman Always Rings Twice.
Oh, yeah. Thinking it would be
I don't think this has anything to do with that.
No, that's so funny. Yes. Now, so I will say that my agent that retired once told me that the book, the story, is the author's, but the title and the cover are committee decisions.
Mhm.
And so I always have a say in the cover. I love the covers and the colors that they've chosen for this series. And sometimes I have a title for a book in my head, and sometimes I don't. And if I don't have a title, it's just like I'm blank. And I am happy to entertain ideas from other people. In fact, at one time, a reader chose a title in the Potting Shed series. A reader chose Midsummer Mayhem, which I thought was just perfect. It's about an outdoor production of Midsummer Night's Dream. And they needed a gardener. So this was a committee decision. And when they gave it to me, I thought, every time Haley turns around, she's having to answer the buzzer at that door. And so that's what it refers to. And she never knows, is it going to be somebody she wants to see? Is it going to be Charles Henry Dill? Or is it going to be the police? So it was kind of a play on that.
Okay. Even after I read the book, I was still thinking,
yeah,
there's nothing to do with the that always rings twice.
It's just that front door buzzer.
Okay. Narrowboats. Because I don't want to give anything away about the story itself, no spoilers or anything like that. But you can certainly talk about narrowboats and narrowboats in England for people who don't know about them.
Oh, I love narrowboats. I mean, so 2 years ago, think back where you were 2 years ago. 2 years ago, next month in March, my husband and I flew to England. We flew to England on 12th. We had this whole I had planned often we'll go and check on places I want to write about or I'm in the middle of writing about. Well, we've been to Bath. We've stayed in Bath a lot. And there is a canal there. And I've seen narrowboats, here and there. But we were going to get on a narrowboat and I was going to be able to see how it goes. And if you remember what happened, so we flew out on March 12th, 2 years ago. We landed on the 13th. And the world had gone crazy. And so 2.5 days later, we flew home. So there when I was going down to Hamble, you know, if you read Glamour Girls, I was going down to Hamble to see about the fairy pool. I was going to see where it was and everything. So I'm sorry, I wish I could say that I have been on a narrowboat, but I have watched a lot of YouTube videos. There's a great, oh, I should look up the name of these. There are these two young women that live on a narrowboat, and they post videos every, you know, week or two about where they're going and how they do it and what they, I just love it. I loved all that stuff. So there's the Avon River, and then there is also the Avon and Kennet Canal that goes alongside Bath. So I was able to use that because that's canals are, as I understand it, easier for narrowboats to negotiate because you don't have the flow and the water level going up and down like you do in a river. So I was very interested in narrowboats, and I thought it would be a good contrast to the pirate ship.
Okay. So before I talk a little bit about the last 2 years, tell me about this, what you can about the plot of the book. We've mentioned Daphne du Maurier, we've mentioned Lady Fowling, but we really haven't said just a little bit you can say about the book.
Sure. Oh yeah, what it's about. Well, from the very beginning, in book one, we're introduced to Charles Henry Dill, who is Lady Fowling's lout of a nephew, as I like to call him, who is, he's in his 60s now. He was the son of her younger sister. And Lady Fowling had no children. She and Sir John had no children. And Haley, he's a very annoying person, but he's so much fun to write, let me tell you. And Haley knows this story that he thought he was going to inherit everything, right? Middlebank House, the library. He doesn't really care about the library, but sure, he'll take that too. And he didn't. And he has yet to stop fuming about that and looking for ways to make it his. That starts in book one. Charles Henry Dill is in book two. He's not really, you know, plays a part, but now he's back with a vengeance because he's talked his way into becoming Haley's personal assistant. And the board, Haley was hired by the board for the society, and she has, you know, friends on there, but they all think, oh well, isn't this a good way to keep him contained? You know, you can put up with him for a half day a week, can't you? So here's Haley having put, that's the opening page. It's Charles Henry Dill gloating about the fact that he's been chosen for her personal assistant. And thinking that if he's got his toe in the door, right? So now he can get more, and then, don't you want to give me the passwords for the website? Don't you want to give, you know, so that it begins with Charles Henry Dill. On Haley's ongoing arc for being curator at the First Edition Society and the library is trying to bring the society, with Mrs. Woolgar kicking and screaming, into the 21st century. The society was started by Lady Fowling, mostly, you know, a small but devoted group of people are members scattered all over the world. She had money, she didn't care, and there's, you know, the money isn't running out. There are no money problems ever with the First Edition Society. But Haley can't help but feel that Lady Fowling would like more people to be interested, to be exposed to the library. And it is a library after all. And so little by little, Haley is chipping away at Mrs. Woolgar, who knew Lady Fowling. She was her personal assistant, and now she's secretary, and feels like she has the proprietary knowledge of what Lady Fowling would like and would not like. So she and Haley are always butting heads. But Haley has got so far as to open the library for 1/2 day a week to the public. It's just shocking. So Haley's contending with that on one hand, putting up with Charles Henry Dill on the other, when at the first open afternoon, at the end of the afternoon, there's one person left, and it's this man who's dressed in tight black trousers and boots and a loose white shirt. He's got a ponytail in the back. And he declares that he's Lady Fowling's grandson. So there we go. We're off on the Middlebank mystery, because as it turns out, John Aubrey is his name. And for those of you who read Frenchman's Creek, the name of the pirate is Jean Benoit Aubrey. So John Aubrey, he doesn't want any money. He doesn't want anything. He only wants to see where his grandmother lived. And people try to say, even Mrs. Woolgar says, he's just one of those crazy fans. But as it turns out, John Aubrey knows things about Lady Fowling that nobody else knows until they're verified by a third source. So it gets kind of weird then.
Okay. We talked about Great Britain. We talked about England. Let's talk about what happened to your writing in the last couple years. I know authors have had different things that they've said about COVID, that it allowed them to write, or that they were stifled with their writing. And I was just curious.
I just kept writing. I didn't seem to have any problem with that. Now, I will say that before the pandemic, I would always, almost every day, I would go someplace else to write. I found it easier to write not at home, because when I'm at home, I'll put the laundry in, I'll play with the cats. So I would go either to our local library, or I would go to, there's a big community area, seating area in an old shopping center. And I couldn't go anywhere. So during most of 2020, I would go out to the car and sit in the car and write. I have a picture of myself out in the car writing, and that did okay. I mean, I didn't. So I had book 2 in this series, and now book 3 is out. I had my first historical fiction come out, and I self-published Potting Shed number 8. Because nobody wants to pick up a series in the middle of its run, and Alibi wasn't taking any more books, and I continually have readers say, "Oh, what's happening to Prue and Christopher? I want to do it." So I had this manuscript almost finished, so I went ahead and self-published that. So I just kept writing.
Good. But I know other authors have said different things, so that's why I was curious.
Yes. Yeah.
But perfect transition. Let's talk about your historical fiction. Let's talk about Glamour Girls first, since I know that was just released in hardcover. I'm not sure exactly how that.
Yeah.
And you have another one coming out in August.
Yes. Glamour Girls came out last February. That's it, right there. And it's coming out in paperback next week on the 8th. So, and that's a World War II story set in England. Surprise. And that came about. I had started thinking about writing historical fiction, maybe a standalone and not a series. And I had come up with an idea, and I talked to my agent about it. And she had heard an editor with a publishing house that did not end up publishing Glamour Girls was interested in a story inspired by, 2018. In 2018, Mary Wilkins Ellis died. She was 101. She was one of the female pilots in Britain during the Second World War who ferried airplanes around the country. So initially they thought it was the Air Transport Auxiliary. And that was the name, and it was a civilian organization. And of course, women were not allowed to fly to begin with. But very quickly at the beginning of the war, they started accepting them. Initially, the ATA was to ferry medical supplies and mail and stuff like that around. But it soon became very apparent to Britain that they needed everyone they could. They were building a lot of airplanes and they needed to get places. So they had to go from factories to bases, or from bases to maintenance units, or back and forth, all over, crisscrossing the country. And so it ended up that the ATA was an organization of both men and women who flew Spitfires and all sorts of planes. So I read Mary's autobiography, which is really fun to read. She was a very exacting woman. She kept track of every single plane she ever flew. The appendices in the back of her book are lengthy. What maintenance units did you fly to? What bases did you fly? You have no idea how many bases there were in Britain during the Second World War. And she wrote everyone down. And while she was writing her autobiography, I loved this. She would say, "Oh, I flew a Spitfire Marine, blah blah blah." She would have the number of that airplane, and she would put it in the text. Anyway. I was quite inspired. She was raised on a farm. She grew up on a farm in Oxfordshire, and she lasted through the war. There were a lot of women that the title of the book, Glamour Girls, comes from the fact that there were some women that were quite glamorous, that were flying airplanes, that would always put their lipstick on before they got out of the cockpit when they finished a flight, so they would look their best. She was not one of those. So it's sort of a oxymoron. Mary flew throughout the war and lived to be 101. So it was a fabulous story. I've always been interested in the Second World War. My husband's father was stationed in Suffolk at the end of the war, toward the end of the war, the build up to D-Day. And we have been he was in Lavenham, for those of you who know England. It's a great little, beautiful little village. And we have been there, I think, 4 times. A lot of these airfields were built on farmland, and most of them went back to farmland after the war. And sometimes pieces were kept. So they would allow the airfield in Lavenham turned back into a farm afterwards. But I think to this day, I mean, we were there probably 5 years ago now, you can go to the tourist office in Lavenham and they will call out to the farm and say, these people would like to come out and just drive, because a lot of the landing strips and the roads are still there, drive around, and they'll let you do that. And you can see some of the Nissen huts that are still there, and they kept the control tower. And they remodeled the control tower, and now they lease it out for offices. And they let us go in and go up to the roof. So the opening scene in Glamour Girls, where Rosalie is standing on the roof one morning counting the planes in, is a story that my father-in-law used to tell, that they would go up to the roof and count the planes in, because you never knew how many were going to come back, if any. So this all just seemed to fit to me to be a really good story to tell.
What about your next one? How do you pronounce that?
Mercy House. Orphans of Mercy House. Yeah, mercy is an old Anglo-Saxon word, so it fit to be placed in. And this takes place in Suffolk, in a town called Southwold, the real place, on the coast. This was the first idea I had, and then I wrote Glamour Girls first, and now I've written this. And this book takes place in 1957. And I got to say, it's kind of hard for me to say 1957 is historical fiction, but all right, that's fine. And it is in 1957, the war was a distant memory for a lot of people in the States, and it was not for people in the UK. And so I felt like 1957 was sort of on the cusp of a lot of things happening. It's before the 60s, it's rationing had only ended 3 years before in Britain. And so I liked all these things kind of coming together. There's a girl, one of the characters is an 11-year-old girl who had polio when she was 4. This is still, she had it before even the first vaccine came out. And so there's that, and that was, very, very much something that people who were alive then would remember in the States or wherever you were, polio. And so I wanted to see this story through the eyes of a woman who in 1957 is 37, had taken care of both of her ill parents until they died, and has nothing. She's lived in the town her whole life. And so it's Olive's story. She starts with nothing, and she thinks she's found something and doesn't know if it's going to stick. So.
Okay, and that comes out?
That comes out in August.
Okay. So there's your 2 historical fiction. So I know that authors are always writing the next book, publicizing the one they wrote a couple years ago. What can you tell us about the next book in the First Editions library series?
Well, I've been, my attention has, I've been distracted recently as I get a new idea ready for my author to pitch. And so I can't say a whole lot about it, except I'm rather taken with this historical business. It's historical mystery series that I hope will see the light of day in the next year or so. It's set in 1921 in London. So.
Okay. Okay. You can talk about this other one, which I know a lot of readers often ask, which is what books, research, authors have influenced your writing?
Well, probably at the very beginning, it was, of course, I wanted to be Jo March from Little Women. We all wanted to be Jo March. But I've got to say, and this is really funny because I don't write science fiction and I have no intention of writing science fiction, but probably the earliest, the strongest influence in my writing career was Ray Bradbury. I heard him speak 3 or 4 times. In fact, the last time I heard him speak was in Tacoma, so just south of where I live. It was a library fundraiser, and it was a year or 2 after he had had a stroke. But he was still, I tell you, this guy could talk. He was just, and I love his books. They're not all science fiction, and he had such an enthusiasm and a love for writing and telling stories. And I think that just really set me on a course. It was sort of like I said, a long and winding road. I mean, I came back to it though. And I would also tell stories as I was writing garden stuff too. So he was certainly an early, here we have the cat. For mysteries, I have recently started laying the blame on, and I'll explain why I say laying the blame. You may have noticed, Lesa, that I don't have a dead body on the first page of any of my mysteries. I tend to take a while to get there.
Mhm.
So I remember in high school, my mom and my sister and I all read the rabbi books by Harry Kemmelman. Monday, the rabbi did this, Tuesday, the rabbi. I loved them. He was writing the cozy mystery series that I wanted to write. And you notice that sometimes there's no body until you're halfway through the book.
Mhm.
So I like to blame him now. That's my,
Okay.
so those were some early, an eclectic group of early influencing.
Mhm. So who do you read now when you're not writing?
Let me see. I've recently read a couple of Jeeves and Wooster books and Map and Lucia, and they all take place in the 20s in England.
Mhm.
So you can see what that's about. But I do like, let's see. Currently, I'm reading one of the Bess Crawford books by Charles Todd. Yeah. It's a recent one, and I can't remember the title of it. It's the one where she goes to France because the matron's son is in trouble.
Yeah.
And I have really enjoyed, I think there are 4 or 5 books out by Abir Mukherjee, the Sam Wyndham and Banerjee books.
yes.
They take set in Calcutta
Mhm.
in, I guess, the early 20s, but I'm not copying that.
Yeah.
So those are very interesting. I love Christopher Fowler's Bryant and May series, set in London. And I also like Ben Aronovich's Rivers of London book.
Yes. Mhm.
It's crazy. I try to tell people, and then there's this magic. And they're hard to describe. They're also excellent audiobooks. Candace Robb is a friend of mine. She writes the Owen Archer, Yorkshire medieval mysteries, and I love her Owen Archer books. And she's got a new one coming out this year, I think. I could go on.
Well, we might let you go on, but I'm going to ask Patrick to come back when he has a moment and see if any of the people that came to the event have any questions.
Here he is.
Okay, great. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. All right, yes, Joyce has a question. She says, I've begun to love the character Charles Henry Dill. Every time I think he can't sink any lower, he manages to exceed my expectations. How did you invent him, and how much fun is he to write?
Oh, he is great fun to write. That's true. He's one of those, sometimes characters are just there, and sometimes you think there's a character there and you have to keep looking and looking. Charles Henry is so different from what Lady Fowling seemed to be, that for him to be her nephew was, I like that contradiction. So I did try to think of some really annoying things. I'll always add annoying things to him, but and in this 3rd book, I actually try to show that he might have a little modicum of humanity about him. We know, I think from the very first book, we knew that he and Maureen Frost, who's on the board, had something going on. So somebody sees something in him. I don't know, but so he just was there.
I like that you mentioned P.G. Wodehouse. I have a fondness for those. I mean, it's there. A good Wodehouse novel is, it just always puts you in a better mood. It's good for what ails you.
Yeah.
I love Jeeves and Wooster. I love the oh gosh, what's the name? Lord Elmsworth. Have you read those at all?
I haven't read those. Yeah. I
Yeah.
do love the Jeeves and Wooster. Yeah, they're
right. And Smith with the P at the front, P. Smith.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, those are great. Let's see here. Okay, Pat wants to know, how are you selecting the authors to feature in your books? Is there rhyme or reason to it, or just?
Mm, Well, I thought Agatha Christie would be the best one to begin with because everybody knows Agatha Christie, and there seems to be this huge resurgence. The Agatha Christie estate, they know their promotion. We've got new movie versions of things, and so I thought, and also I wanted to draw in the fan fiction idea because I had no idea. There's fan fiction, Agatha Christie fan fiction all over the place. I have a friend who writes Jane Austen fan fiction. So I knew it was a big thing. So Agatha Christie seemed just, and if Agatha Christie was going to be first, I figured Dorothy L. Sayers had to be second.
Right.
And Murder Must Advertise is such an entertaining book. She worked in an advertising agency in the late 20s. And so she wrote Murder Must Advertise because she had a deadline, a book deadline, and she was working on something else, The Nine Tailors or something. And she didn't have it, where she wanted it yet. And so she just wrote Murder Must Advertise in a flash because it was all in her head, the way those people talked. Love it. I love it. And so the third one, Daphne du Maurier, I wanted this to be Lady Fowling's book. So we get to see some of her writing, speaking of fan fiction. And I had such fun writing these snippets from Lady Fowling's own books. Her amateur sleuth was Francois Flambeau. And she had a rather florid but enthusiastic style of writing.
Okay, let's see here. Oh, did Lisa's obviously a librarian by trade. Do you, I may have missed it. Have any of that in your background?
Well, as a matter of fact, Patrick, in 5th grade, when we used to go down, every class had their library time, right? You would go down, you'd have your hour in the library and go back. But in 5th grade, they would let students help behind the counter.
Really?
And it was all I could think about until they let me in 5th grade stamp books. And so after that, when I was in, I have a second master's degree in urban horticulture from the University of Washington here, and that's kind of got me into garden writing. And while I was going to school, I was working at the Elizabeth Miller Library, which is a horticultural library associated with UW and is absolutely fabulous. People should look it up online, millerlibrary.org. And so I actually have worked in a library before.
Cool. Let me see. Anything else coming in question-wise? Let's see. Well, just somebody saying how much they love Bryant and May. And those are really special, kind of whimsical, fun books, aren't they?
Yeah, and they're so steeped in London. It's like a quirky, crazy travelogue of London. And there are times I have to read passages out loud to my husband because, Arthur Bryant will be walking down past the Skinner's Arms. We know the Skinner's Arms. We've been in it. I mean, they're actually writes the way London is. So that's fun.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife and I went to London and Paris the Christmas right before COVID hit. So it was kind of like you. We were just a few months earlier and we lucked out. But oh man, what a wonderful city. I would love to go back there and spend some time.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's just an incredible place. And the past is kind of seeping up at every corner you go to.
It is. I mean, every time they start to, dig the street up, they'll find some Roman viaduct underneath or something.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Well, I think that's about it for the questions that have come in. Thank you both very much. Again, everybody, we have autographed copies of The Librarian Always Rings Twice. And do you have a working title for your next book in the series?
No.
Not yet?
It's back to that title thing.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks so much, Lisa, for stepping in and hosting this.
Thanks, Lisa.
Congrats again on the Raven.
Yeah,
That was
really.
Thank
so cool.
Yeah.
And thanks, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. Thanks, Patrick.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.